A Lady and Her Husband by Amber Reeves. Chapter 1. Rosemary looked round her mother's drawing room. It was a charming room, she thought, of its conventional kind, gay and luxurious, anxious to please, like some soft, pretty women. She had never considered its origin before, but now she felt sure that her father must have planned it. It revealed his mind, large, cheerful, excellent, and showed the thorough competence of his taste. She had chosen this room deliberately for an interview with her mother. She was going to tell her mother that she was in love, and she had found herself shy, afraid of the poor lady's emotion. In the publicity of the spacious room, where anyone might interrupt them, a display of feeling would be difficult. She made sure once more of this train of thought. Then she looked anxiously at Mrs. Heyham. Mary was sitting in her usual place by the side of the hearth, and for the moment, behind the glittering fire-flushed tea things, she seemed curiously unreal. She was wearing a chain that her husband had given her, set with pearls and crystals that caught the light, and so did a brooch that was a present from Trent, her son. Behind these witnesses of masculine esteem, there was the vagueness of grey stuff, of lace, of pale brown hair, and a face where the play of lights and shadows blotted out expression. Rosemary, seeking for some promise of immediate cheerful sympathy, could see nothing but her mother's evident dignity and grace. On the point of speaking, she hesitated. She had not the least idea, after all, how her mother would respond to her. At that moment, Mrs. Heyham looked up and met her daughter's eyes. "Yes," she said, "I like your new way of doing your hair, my dear. It suits you, it gives you height, and I like your funny green frock." She smiled a little shyly. She could not tell the child how lovely she found her. But the tenderness in her voice reached Rosemary, making her feel suddenly affectionate and ashamed. "Mother, dear," she cried, "how selfish I am! Am I very horrid to you?" She had forgotten the ungenerous detachment which she had planned, and as she spoke she crossed the floor to the rug by her mother's knee. She had been fussing all day about her own feelings, she told herself, and she had hardly given a thought to her mother's. Mrs. Heyham paused before she answered. It was her custom to consider what she said with a view to her children's welfare, and her replies, in consequence, were sometimes evasive. Horrid to her? What made Rosemary, she wondered, worry about such a thing? "I hope you don't think so, my dear," passed this scrutiny, but did not satisfy her daughter. "You don't say I'm not," she insisted. Her mother reassured her. "Of course you're not." Rosemary sighed. "I don't think many mothers are like you," she admitted, and for a moment her warmth made Mrs. Heyham anxious. These expansions from the children were apt to be connected with remorse. Well, whatever it was, she would hear it now. She put out her hand to smooth the soft hair pressed against her knee. But Rosemary, turning quickly, caught the wandering fingers. To Mary it looked almost as though she had taken fright. Her eyes were wide open, and she was trembling a little. "Mother," she said, "I've something to tell you. I promised. I'm going to marry Anthony." Before she could stop herself, Mrs. Heyham had pulled her hand away. Rosemary promised to marry. At 18. Rosemary, who had been so careless of love. The girl, anxiously listening, could read nothing but disappointment into her. "My darling." For a moment they looked at each other. Then came the amends that Mary was never slow to make. This time she took her daughter's hand in hers. "You know how fond I am of Anthony. It isn't that. But you're so young. How can you know? How can you possibly know?" Rosemary found no words that would convince her. Instead, she turned away from her mother's eyes and stared into the fire. It was not a thing one could talk about, how one knew. Mary looked down at her bright young head. She loved it too dearly, she thought, and she could not lose it. "Won't you wait?" she began, but then she checked herself. It was passion, not happiness, that she had wanted to keep from the child for a little longer. But Rosemary had heard her cry and was answering it. "We've waited ever since the summer. I didn't want to hurt you, Mother, but I couldn't feel that anyone should know. Tony wanted to tell you at once, but I wouldn't let him." Mary did her best to smile. She could not speak. She was humiliated. She had never intruded herself on her children or forced the delicate privacies of their minds. But she had stood apart only, she thought, to watch and direct them better because they were not conscious of her attention. And now for months Rosemary had known these new intimacies of love while she had seen no further. That was what it amounted to, then her charming manners. Rosemary, from the tight grasp of her hands, guessed at Mrs. Heyham's suffering. "Mother, dear, don't mind," she begged her. "Why should you mind so much?" Why should she mind? For a moment Mary struggled with tears, then she turned resolutely from her painful thoughts. "My darling," she said, "I'm selfish, thoroughly selfish. You mustn't let me spoil your happiness. It's nothing, my dear, only a foolish instinct. You see, I feel that as each of you goes, it closes one of the windows of my life." Rosemary sighed a little with relief. Here was a matter on reasonable grounds where one could argue about it. She rather enjoyed discussing feelings, though she was shy of showing them. She relaxed her attitude, which had been a little strained, and started to make a point. "But you haven't lost us, Mother. Still there. It's only that we're grown up. After all, having children is an experience, and you have got it there, so much to the good." Mrs. Heyham shook her head. She had not the habit of considering her life in terms of experience. Her mind had darkened again over Rosemary's words. Experience. That must be an idea of Anthony's. It was a wonder the child had not said mental capital. She would never be rid of Anthony now. Whenever she talked to Rosemary, Anthony would be behind her. "And of course I'm not going to marry yet." Rosemary reproached herself with not having made this clear. Her mother must think her callous. "I should feel sorry enough if I were really going away. You do know how much I love you, don't you, Mother darling?" She started to rise so that she might reach her mother to kiss her, but Mary rose too. For a moment they clung together, trying each of them to think of nothing but their mutual love. Then Mary made the need of wiping her tears an excuse for freeing herself. "I'm going upstairs," she said, "and when I come down I shall be a much nicer, more satisfactory mother, and very glad that you have chosen such a dear boy. I'm delighted that it's Anthony, dear. You must tell him so from me. And now if I were you, I would go and see your father. He's in the library. You'll be glad to get it all over." She smiled, pressed Rosemary's hand again, and turned towards the door. Rosemary, left alone, did not go to her father at once. She was angry with herself. "I didn't do it right," she thought. "I hurt her. I don't see why she should have been hurt, but she was." For a moment, though she thought, she found no explanation. Then she decided, "It is father, I suppose. He has kept her so wrapped up, and now when she has to face the fact she is not accustomed to it. But all the same, I do wish I hadn't hurt her." She sat down again in her comfortable chair and recalled the conversation. It had been self-conscious. She felt and artificial. They had not really been open with one another. And yet she did not know what was wrong. It was very difficult. But she could not keep her mind fixed for long on this distasteful subject. The firelight and the solitude were pleasant, and her thoughts went back to Anthony and the summer. It was in the early summer at Kingsley that she had first loved Anthony, though she had not known it. It gave her pleasure to remember the day. She had been bathing with Laura in the stream at the bottom of the garden, and on their way back they had met Anthony coming down the path with towels under his arm. It was blowing, and the wind blew back the folds of his thin shirt. He had asked them whether the river was clear again after the storm, and she had told him yes. The water was still brown, but you could see the white stones in the bottom. Then, absurdly like a child, she had flushed with shame. Laura and she had been pretending that they were water nymphs, and they had twisted leaves into her hair. Anthony was looking at the green crown. It had seemed unbearable that he might think she was foolish, laugh at her. Without waiting for Laura, she had walked away. She had gone quickly through the rose garden because she did not want Laura to follow her, and along the old stone wall. There was no one under the beeches at the end, and she had stopped there, telling herself that it was beautiful. The lilies and the blue larkspurs shone in the sun. There was no wind into the trees, and the still air felt warm. She had looked up to see the light coming down through the young leaves. It was bright, and it glowed like light in the trumpet of a daffodil. And then, as she stood, a little dazed by the shining leaves and the heat, something that hurt her seemed to stir in her heart. She had thrown herself down beside the trunk of the tree because she had found that she was crying. She had only been a child then, afraid of love, afraid and exalted beyond any need of Anthony. She had been in love with the summer days, with poetry, with warmth and colour and flowers. The world had become a place of caressing, delicate contacts. Even the air seemed kind to her as she moved through it. Under her happy senses her spirit had quickened. Here, she had thought, was worship, if she could worship. Here in this awe and delight, this conviction that she was one with the flowering earth, with its light, its heat, its joy. Here was a new birth. She had lost her old self, her old hopes and desires, and had become instead a vessel filled with the wonder and the beauty of life. This ecstasy had not stayed. It had been banished by something more personal, less diffused, by a return of her mind upon itself. It was a new troubling thing. She could remember the first surprise of its insurgence. It had been a hot afternoon, and she had been walking by the river. Slowly, without any thought of where she was going. A willow bush grew in the long grass by the edge of the water, and beside it she had seen Anthony's blazer lying on the ground. Anthony was playing tennis with Trent. He must have forgotten it. It was a pleasant, secluded place, and the patch of colour in the grass seemed to make a reason why she should stop. She had sat down in what shade the bush afforded. Presently she would carry the blazer back to the house. The light flickered on the water. Rosemary sat lazily inert, watching the willow leaves as they stirred a little, and the pointed shadows that changed their shape as they moved over the uneven grass. A white butterfly was circling above her, and while she looked, he fluttered down on to the blazer's tempting brightness. The surface did not please him. His eager trunk found no honey. Rosemary, her face held low, saw the under surface of his wings gleam blue as he rose from the deceptive cloth. She put out her hand to it, idly, where it lay warm in the sun, but when her fingers met the soft stuff she paused. In the short space of a moment, the action had become intimate, had assumed significance. She felt that Anthony must know she wanted to touch his coat. Then she took courage. Her doubt, her hesitation were nothing to Anthony. His coat was thrown down, forgotten, disregarded. She might touch it or not, no sense of his could be fine enough to betray her. She had pulled it towards her and buried her face in the limp, kindly cloth before she realized, trembling, what she had done. Now remembering it, she moved in the big chair and sighed. She almost regretted that moment of sharp feeling. She was happy now, but even the first secret light of her happiness was at its end. She had told her mother, she had still to tell her father, and Laura, and Trent, and they would all discuss it and fuss about it. Trent would think it his duty to express his opinions. She had been foolish, really, not to choose a time when Trent was away. She felt restless. She pushed back her chair and bent over to one of the tall windows. Outside a spring gale was flinging drops of water from plane trees in the London square. The rain had stopped, there was blue in the sky, and an old man who sold primroses had left his shelter and was carrying his basket down the empty street. It was the day for a long walk over the downs with the dogs. She was watching the yellow gleams of light that lay on the pavement and its iron railings when her attention was caught by a cry from the old man. Hope had entered his heart when he saw her, and his features were now bent to an encouraging smile. "Here you are, lady," he called and held up the basket. Rosemary shook her head and then, to end the matter, walked away from the window. Her mother was right, she thought. She might as well get it over. Slowly and reluctantly she went downstairs. Meanwhile Mrs. Heyham had gone to her sitting room. She shut its door behind her with relief. Here, alone, there was no need to think of Rosemary's feelings. She could give way now, a little, to her jealousy and her regret, to the fierce dislike that she had felt when she thought of Anthony touching her daughter's hair, turning up her face to enjoy its loveliness. They had loved one another for months, and she had never known. To her neglectful eyes, the child had seemed unchanged. It had been a joy to her that Rosemary, fastidious and a little reserved, had never been swayed or excited by the people who moved her sister. She had believed that this young favourite daughter possessed some quick instinct of her own, some power of direction that was enough for her. Mary had been able to stand by and see her reveal herself of the widest freedom in the confidence that it was Rosemary with whom she had to deal, not some friend or some enthusiasm of the moment. And now men had come into her life, and love and approaching marriage. To her mother it seemed that this must spoil it. Rosemary's liberty of mind was gone. She must respond to a man's clumsy, imperative emotions, tune her mind to his, find her growth and her insight checked by insistent personal ties. That was all very well later on, but Rosemary was only a child. She turned her mind with an effort from this unbearable thought. It was her duty, she reminded herself, not to be miserable, but to be honest. Being honest now, as generally meant to Mrs. Heyham, discovering a way to accept any blame that remained when she had made excuses for everyone else. On this occasion she found it as easy as usual to persuade herself that she was behaving badly. She was doing, she must admit it, just what she had despised in other mothers. She was regarding her children as mere objects for her own affections. She had not grudged Laura, because she had felt she herself was giving the brilliant creature to Harry, because in Laura she had wanted to live through again her own early boyhood and motherhood. Now she was hurt and bitter because Rosemary had put her aside, had claimed a right to her own youth and her own beauty. She could only feel that Rosemary did not know what a priceless gift they were. Since Laura had married, she had been hoping, as silly old women hope, to fill a greater place in Rosemary's life. She had felt that this was the time for her, for which she had waited ever since Rosemary had learned to walk. She had stood then, a mere mother, outside the excitements and mysteries of nursery life. All through the children's youth she had waited, greedy for their love. Now, It seemed to her her chance was gone. Now she was middle-aged and her life was failing her. With the children went its purpose and its meaning. She had worked hard to be the sort of mother they liked, to make her home a congenial background for their activities. She had not oppressed them with her own needs or forced their affection from them. And now they were going to other homes where she would be only a visitor who rang their doorbells and asked their servants whether they were in. She could no more share with them, with their husbands, than she had shared them with one another when they were babies. She could not even arrange the world for them as she had then. They had grown up, as modern girls do, in touch with an intricate life that meant nothing to her. She had given them her ignorant sympathy, her facile interest, her approval where she could, but if they had valued these, it was because they loved her, and it would not matter to them any more what she and their father felt. They would wait on someone else's ideas and someone else's moods. She had tried her utmost to be just to them, to hold herself in check. It only made her feel the more for them now the slowness and the egotism of men. They were happy. She wondered how much their happiness had cost of the freedom she had so painfully given them. She rose from the chair where she had been sitting to walk up and down the room. She was stung again by the knowledge that Rosemary was gone, that she looked to other loves, to a new life, to another loyalty. She tried in vain to change her thoughts by centering them on her own foolishness. I have been dreadful, she told herself, ugly, grasping, blind. She has a right to choose her happiness. That was bald enough to shock any woman to common sense, but she could not quite believe it. Why had the child not waited? One thing she could at least do, she told herself. She could use self-control and refrain from causing discomfort to others by her selfish pain. She had failed already quite sufficiently that afternoon. The clear discernment of a duty was always a relief to Mrs. Heyham, a stimulus to which she could respond mechanically. She now turned her mind, after an effort, to considering the matter from Rosemary's point of view, to any thoughts indeed that would keep her mind from its ungenerous fretting. And Rosemary's interview with her father, she supposed, was now taking place. It would not be terrible. James's children, like everyone else, found him a sympathetic and delightful man. But Trent was another matter. It was a pity that neither his sisters nor she could really get on with Trent. She had never felt for him the passionate love a mother sometimes feels for her only son. She had hoped to, she had tried to, but Trent had baffled her. It was wrong of her, for poor Trent was loyal and affectionate. It was a pity, perhaps, that they had sent him to Harrow, where his family could not follow him. That was perhaps why they could not follow now his perfectly correct and manly view of life. She was struggling with a sense of fatigue and incoherence among these familiar reflections when the door opened to admit her husband. James seldom forgot to kiss his wife when he found her alone, not only because he was a methodical man, but because he seldom forgot that he was fond of her. Today he kept his arm round her shoulders and looked down at her tenderly. "Poor little mother," he said, "to have nobody left but me." She let him draw her head against his shoulder where it was easier to cry. He used to call her "little mother" long ago, when the children were babies and belonged to her. After a little he thought that she had cried enough and ought to be cheered up now. He made her sit in a comfortable chair while he went over to the fireplace. "Of course Rosemary is much too young for this sort of thing," he said, believing that the only permanent cheering up was obtained by facing facts. "But we must admit that she has done very well for herself, better than poor Laura." This was the first time anybody had thought of calling Laura poor, and Mrs. Heyham looked up for explanations. "Hastings, Her husband went on, is a thoroughly decent fellow. He's got about most of the young men the children have in the house. And since Laura isn't here, I don't mind saying that Woolhouse is a bit of a fool. I fancy he came the man of the world over Laura. He makes her very happy. Mrs. Heyham's voice was a little doubtful. And he is an excellent man of business. It's quite possible she'll soon have as many cares as you, my dear, but as you know, I have always declared that since my girls would have enough to live on anyhow, I do not mean to make money the most important thing. I don't object to it, of course, but I don't see why I should let it sway my judgment. Laura's man is not good enough for her, and I shall be disappointed if Hastings doesn't turn out a son-in-law to be proud of. He smiled at Mary and stroked his trim little pointed beard. Mrs. Heyham did not answer, but she realized as she looked up how proud she was of James. He was a hard-working businessman himself, and after 30 years of it he might have been forgiven if he had been a little obsessed by ordinary business standards. Most men in his position wouldn't have looked at a penniless boy whatever they thought of his intellect and character. But James did not keep his principles for nothing. She could almost wish for once that he had been a more conventional father, and she felt a woman's anxiety as she wondered how far his complaisance had extended. You told her, of course, that they would have to wait? She asked. There was no need. The child showed very proper feeling. But I did say that I didn't suppose you would consent to her setting out on married life at 18. In any case, it appears that the young man wants to be earning enough to pay for his own share of the menage. James was evidently pleased with the interview that had just taken place. She's a dear child, he went on after a minute. You ought to be congratulated on both of them, Mary. Though I admit that as a wife I prefer their mother. The women of your day had more character, though nobody made a fuss about their brains. Nowadays young people treat each other as if they were all friends of the same sex. It may suit them, but I know I shouldn't have liked it. Mrs. Heyham did not move, and he wondered whether his talk was having the desired effect. He felt very sorry for her. When he thought about it, he often felt sorry for women. Good women had such a hard time of it, they suffered so inevitably as life went on. It was rough on them losing their looks, it was rough on them when their boys went to school, and many of them had a bad time with their husbands. Men wouldn't have stood it, but women, thank God for it, were like that. Men were not grateful enough, but he had done his best to make life smooth for Mary and the girls. Poor Mary! He was glad she had cried on his shoulder. She was a dignified little thing. It was not always easy to tell what she was thinking. He bent over to her and stroked her hair. That, to his mind, was a use of her hair, and to please him she dressed it in a way that was not easily disarranged. She looked up at him, and he saw at once that she was still a little excited. James, she said, and then paused. He sat down on the arm of a chair so that he might give her better attention. When she spoke, it was in the slow, thoughtful way he deplored. It meant that she was taking things too hard. What do other women do when the children go? She asked him. How do they fill up their days? I should say a good many of them were glad of rest, he told her reassuringly. It's not such easy work bringing up children. Haven't you noticed a friend whose grey hairs have grown brown since her daughter is married? We shall have you a gay young thing again in no time. Or you could take up politics and make Trent stand for Parliament. The old lady would look fine as candidate's mother. She shook her head. You forget the candidate's wife. I don't think I want to play second fiddle to Trent's Lady Hester. But I suppose that is about what they do. Either they knit boots for their grandchildren, or they go on committees. The mention of Lady Hester had ruffled James's good humour. If Trent waits for her, he will wait some time, he said. He shrugged his shoulders and then they both smiled. Trent's good at waiting, he admitted. Mary jumped up from a chair and took his hands. James, she whispered, I sometimes wish there was something Trent wasn't good at. James kissed her. That was all right. Here was the old lady quite cheerful again. They must all be very kind to her for a day or two, and when she realized that Rosemary wasn't leaving her yet and got used to Anthony's new status, she would see that there was nothing to be unhappy about for a long time. And when the disaster came, she would be busy waging war on Laura's nurses. I told Rosemary she could have a young man to dinner, my dear, he said, apprehensive, but feeling that on the whole it was better to get it over. It seemed the only decent thing to do. His wife appeared to have accepted the worst. I'm glad I forgot to tell her, was Serene. Laura's been here to say that she and Harry aren't coming. That's just as well. Trent will be quite enough for them in one evening.